On a sprawling naval base in San Diego, a quiet janitor named Logan Martinez pushed his cleaning cart through corridors lined with decorated officers and gleaming medals. No one acknowledged him except for a 7-year-old girl with bright eyes who skipped beside him and called him Daddy. One afternoon during a packed ceremony briefing, Commander Natalie Briggs, a decorated SEAL leader known for her sharp tongue and sharper standards, spotted him mopping near the podium with officers watching and smirking. She called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey janitor, what was your call sign? Mop 6? Bucket 1? Laughter rippled through the room. Logan stopped, mop in hand, and slowly looked up. No one expected him to answer. No one could have imagined a legend standing before them. But when he spoke 2 quiet words, the entire room went silent. And a ghost from naval history stepped back into the light. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Naval Base San Diego, casting long shadows across polished floors that gleamed like mirrors. The base hummed with its usual rhythm, boots striking concrete in perfect cadence, voices barking commands across training yards, helicopter rotors chopping the air above the Pacific coastline. This was a place where precision mattered, where rank commanded respect, and where uniforms told the story of who you were before you ever opened your mouth. Logan Martinez didn't wear a uniform. He wore faded work pants, a gray custodial shirt with his name stitched crookedly above the pocket, and boots that had seen better years. His cleaning cart squeaked slightly as he pushed it down the main administrative corridor, the sound nearly drowned out by the constant motion of military life around him. Mop bucket sloshing, supply bag hanging from one handle. He moved with a quiet efficiency that most people never noticed. Most people didn't notice him at all. He was 38 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd lived more than his years. His dark hair, slightly too long for military standards, was pulled back into a small knot at the base of his neck. His hands, calloused and strong, gripped the mop handle with the kind of steady control that came from muscle memory, though not the kind built from janitorial work. These were hands that had held rifles, rappelling ropes, and the weight of decisions that saved lives or ended them, but no one here knew that. Or if they did, they'd long since forgotten. A group of young recruits passed him in the hallway, fresh from morning drills, their faces still flushed with exertion and pride. One of them snickered as Logan bent to wipe up a scuff mark near the water fountain. "Check it out. The janitor's really going at that spot," one muttered. "Not quite quietly enough." "Probably the highlight of his day," another added. And they laughed as they continued down the corridor. Logan didn't look up. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was a choice, not a weakness. He finished cleaning the mark, wrung out his mop, and continued on his route. The base was massive, sprawling across acres of prime San Diego real estate, and his territory covered 3 buildings: administration, the enlisted mess hall, and the family services wing. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, he moved through these spaces like a ghost, cleaning up after people who rarely saw him as anything more than part of the scenery. The administration building was always the busiest in the mornings. Officers rushed between meetings, assistants carried stacks of classified folders, and the air buzzed with the particular tension that came from people whose decisions affected lives across oceans. Logan navigated it all with practiced ease, steering his cart around hurried footsteps, timing his movements so he was never in anyone's way. He'd just finished mopping the corridor outside the briefing rooms when the double doors burst open and a cluster of officers emerged, their conversation animated and loud. Among them was Commander Natalie Briggs, and when she entered a room, everyone knew it. She was 34, compact and muscular, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it looked painful. Her uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal placed with geometric precision. But it wasn't the uniform that commanded attention. It was the way she carried herself, like someone who'd earned every inch of respect through blood, sweat, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. She'd made SEAL history as one of the first women to complete the training pipeline. And she'd spent the last decade proving that her presence wasn't a diversity checkbox but a tactical advantage. She was brilliant, driven, and had a reputation for not suffering fools or excuses. Her eyes swept the corridor as she spoke with her executive officer, a shorter man who was practically jogging to keep up with her stride. Her gaze passed over Logan without pausing, the way people look at furniture or walls. Necessary but unremarkable. "I want the operations brief ready by 1400, she was saying, her voice crisp and clear. No delays, no excuses. If the intelligence reports aren't in by then, someone's going to explain why to the admiral. And it won't be me." "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied. Scribbling notes on a tablet, they swept past Logan, the commander's boot nearly stepping in the wet streak he'd just cleaned. He pulled his mop back slightly, avoiding contact, and she didn't even notice. The group continued down the hallway, voices fading as they turned the corner toward the operations center. Logan returned to his work, methodical and unhurried. He'd cleaned this same hallway hundreds of times, knew every tile, every corner, every place where dirt liked to hide. There was a strange peace in the repetition, a simplicity that his old life had never allowed. Back then, every moment had been calculated. Every decision weighted with consequences that rippled outward in ways he couldn't always control. Now, his biggest decision was whether to use the pine or lemon cleaner in the mess hall bathrooms. He pushed his cart toward the next section, passing beneath a wall covered with photographs of the base's history. Black and white images of sailors from decades past, color photos of modern ceremonies, faces of men and women who'd served with distinction. Logan's eyes drifted across them without stopping. His face wasn't up there, and that's exactly how he wanted it. A door opened ahead, and a small figure darted out, blonde ponytail bouncing, backpack nearly as big as she was. 7-year-old Skylar Martinez had her father's dark eyes and her late mother's bright smile. She spotted Logan instantly, and her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" she called, running toward him with the fearless abandon that only young people possessed. Logan's expression transformed in an instant. The careful neutrality melted away, replaced by warmth that made him look 10 years younger. He set his mop aside and knelt down just as she crashed into him, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Hey, little warrior," he said softly, holding her close. "How was class?" "Mrs. Patterson said my drawing of a dolphin was really good," Skylar announced proudly, pulling back to look at him. "And I got a gold star for my math worksheet." "That's my girl," Logan said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Smart and artistic. Deadly combination." She giggled, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Can we eat lunch together today? I brought extra crackers." "Wouldn't miss it," he promised as they stood, hand in hand. The world around them continued its relentless pace. Officers strode past with purpose, radios crackled with coded communications, and somewhere in the distance, a drill instructor's voice carried across the training grounds. But in that moment, standing in a freshly mopped hallway with his daughter's small hand in his, Logan Martinez had everything that mattered. He didn't need anyone to salute him. He didn't need recognition or medals or his name on a wall. He'd walked away from all of that, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat, because the little girl looking up at him with absolute trust and love, she was worth more than every mission he'd ever completed, every medal he'd ever been offered, every moment of glory the Navy could have given him. She was his whole world. And protecting that world meant staying invisible, staying quiet, staying exactly where he was, even if it meant being invisible to everyone else. The enlisted mess hall occupied the entire ground floor of Building 7. A sprawling cafeteria that served nearly 2,000 personnel across 3 meal periods. Stainless steel tables stretched in neat rows beneath fluorescent lights that hummed with electric persistence. The walls were painted in neutral beige, decorated only with posters about nutrition, safety protocols, and the occasional motivational quote about honor and service. Logan pushed through the maintenance entrance with Skylar at his side, her small hand gripping his as they navigated the service corridor that led to the dining area. The lunch rush was in full swing, with the noise of conversation and clattering trays creating a wall of sound that made Skylar scrunch up her nose. "It's so loud in here," she said, raising her voice to be heard. "That's the sound of hungry sailors," Logan replied with a slight smile. "Very dangerous if you get between them and their food. They found their usual spot at a table near the far wall, away from the main traffic flow. It was quieter here, close to the emergency exit and the supply closet where Logan kept his extra cleaning materials. He set down his lunch bag, a simple brown paper sack that contained 2 sandwiches he'd made that morning, apple slices, and a juice box for Skylar. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She climbed onto the bench seat, swinging her legs beneath the table as Logan unpacked their lunch with careful attention. He'd cut her sandwich into triangles the way she liked, and removed the crusts even though she was getting old enough that she probably didn't need that anymore. But some habits were hard to break, and making her lunch exactly the way she preferred, it was a small act of love he wasn't ready to give up. "Turkey and cheese," he announced, sliding her plate across. "With extra pickles, as requested." "You're the best." "Daddy," Skylar said, taking an enthusiastic bite out across the mess hall. A group of junior officers sat at a center table, their uniforms crisp and their voices carrying the particular confidence that came from recent promotions and not quite enough real-world experience to temper it. One of them, a lieutenant with closely cropped red hair and a sunburn across his nose, noticed Logan and elbowed his companion. "That's the janitor guy," he said, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Heard he's been here for like 5 years. Never moves up, never transfers. Just mops floors." A female ensign at the table glanced over, her expression curious. "Maybe he likes the stability. Not everyone wants to climb the ladder. Or maybe he couldn't climb it if he tried," the red-headed lieutenant said with a smirk. "You don't end up as a permanent janitor on a military base because you're overflowing with ambition and talent." They laughed, the sound carrying across the mess hall. A few other tables glanced their way, some smiling, others returning to their meals without comment. Logan heard every word. His hearing had been trained to pick out conversations in much noisier environments than this, to distinguish threat from background noise in situations where that distinction meant life or death. But he didn't react. His face remained calm, almost serene, as he opened his own sandwich and took a measured bite. Skylar, absorbed in her lunch and chattering about a book she was reading about ocean animals, didn't notice the commentary from across the room. A custodial supervisor, a civilian contractor named Gary who managed the janitorial staff, approached Logan's table with a clipboard. He was in his 50s, heavyset, with a perpetually worried expression that came from dealing with military bureaucracy and cleaning supply budgets. "Martinez," Gary said, his voice nasal and slightly wheezing. "Need you to handle the spill in Building 3 this afternoon." Some genius knocked over a whole bucket of paint in the admin conference room. Logan nodded. "What kind of paint?" "Latex, I think. Interior wall paint. Should come up okay if you get to it quick. I'll head over after lunch." Gary's eyes flicked to Skylar, then back to Logan. "You know, you've got enough seniority now. You could apply for a supervisor position. Better pay, actual benefits. Your kid could use that, right? It was meant kindly, and Logan recognized the intention behind it. But management meant meetings, paperwork, dealing with personnel issues, and budget constraints. It meant being visible, being known, being part of a system that asked questions and kept records. I appreciate it, Gary, Logan said quietly. But I'm good where I am. Gary shrugged, making a note on his clipboard. Suit yourself. Most people would jump at the chance, but hey, if you're happy mopping floors, more power to you. He walked away, shaking his head slightly. Skylar looked up at her father, pickle juice on her chin. Why don't you want to be a supervisor? She asked with the blunt curiosity that only young people could manage without offense. Logan wiped her chin with a napkin, considering his answer. Because being a supervisor means I'd have less time with you, he said simply. And you're more important than a promotion. She seemed to accept this logic without question, returning her attention to her sandwich. But across the room, someone else had been listening. Commander Natalie Briggs stood near the serving line with a tray in hand, her attention supposedly on the options before her. But her training made her aware of everything in her peripheral vision, every conversation within earshot, every anomaly that didn't quite fit the expected pattern, and Logan Martinez didn't fit. She'd noticed him before. Of course. You couldn't work on a base this size without eventually becoming aware of the support staff who kept things running. But she'd never paid particular attention until recently, when she'd seen him moving through the corridors with a precision that seemed oddly familiar. The way he navigated crowded spaces, always aware of his surroundings, never caught off guard. The way he held himself, not hunched or subservient despite his position, but upright and controlled. And there was something about his hands. She'd noticed them when he'd moved his cart aside for her that morning. They weren't the soft, uncalloused hands of someone who'd spent their whole life in low-skill labor. They were scarred, hardened, the hands of someone who'd done something else before this. She selected a salad and moved to an empty table, positioning herself where she could observe without being obvious about it. Logan was talking with his daughter now. His voice too low to hear, but his body language completely transformed from the neutral mask he wore while working. With the girl, he was animated, warm, fully present in a way that suggested she was the center of his entire universe. Natalie felt an unexpected pang at the sight. She'd given up that kind of life, that possibility, when she'd chosen the teams. Relationships were difficult when you spent months deployed in classified locations, when you couldn't talk about your work, when the physical and mental demands left little energy for emotional connection. She'd told herself it was worth it, that her career was what mattered, most days. She believed it. One of her junior officers, Lieutenant Wade Chun, approached her table with his own tray. "Mind if I join you, Commander?" he asked. She gestured to the empty seat. Chun was competent, professional, one of the better tacticians in her unit. He sat down and began eating, following her gaze across the mess hall. "That's Martinez," Chun said, recognizing where she was looking. "Custodial staff. Keeps to himself mostly. Seems like a decent guy. How long has he been here?" Natalie asked, keeping her tone casual. 4, maybe 5 years. He showed up right around the time I got assigned here. Never causes problems, always does his job. His daughter goes to the base school. What's his story? Chun shrugged. No idea. He doesn't really talk to anyone. Some of the guys think he's ex-military, maybe got a bad discharge or something. But no one knows for sure. Natalie filed that information away, her tactical mind already working through possibilities. Ex-military would explain some of what she observed, the bearing, the awareness. But there were thousands of veterans who took civilian jobs after service. It didn't necessarily mean anything significant. Still, something about Logan Martinez nagged at her. Like a puzzle piece that looked like it should fit but wouldn't quite slide into place. She returned her attention to her lunch. but found herself glancing back across the mess hall more than once, watching the quiet janitor and his daughter share their simple meal in comfortable companionship, and wondering what story lay behind those careful, scarred hands and that too watchful gaze. The afternoon sun hung low over the Pacific as Logan and Skylar walked along the perimeter path that curved around the eastern edge of the base. This was their routine on days when the weather cooperated. After lunch, before he returned to work and she went back to afternoon classes, they took 15 minutes to walk and talk. Away from the noise and bustle of the main facilities, the path was lined with native plants, drought-resistant shrubs and scattered palm trees that rustled in the ocean breeze. Beyond the chain-link fence, the city sprawled toward the horizon, but here on the path, it felt almost peaceful. Skylar skipped ahead, then circled back, her energy seemingly endless despite a full morning of school. "Daddy, look," she said, pointing at a hawk circling high above them. "Do you think it's hunting?" Logan tilted his head back, shading his eyes against the sun. "Probably. Red-tailed hawk, by the look of it. They hunt rodents, small birds, anything they can catch." "Is it hard to catch things when you're flying that high?" "Not if you're patient and you know what to look for," Logan said. "Hawks have incredible vision. They can see things we'd miss completely." Skylar absorbed this information with the seriousness she brought to most of their conversations. She was bright, curious, always asking questions that forced Logan to think carefully about his answers. He never talked down to her or oversimplified things just because she was young. She deserved better than that. They reached a bench that overlooked a small maintenance yard, and Logan gestured for her to sit. She climbed up beside him, her legs dangling well above the ground. "You seemed sad this morning," Skylar said suddenly, her voice losing some of its earlier brightness. "When you were making breakfast, you were looking at Mom's picture." "You were looking at Mom's picture." Logan's chest tightened. She was too perceptive for 7 years old, noticed too much. But he'd never lied to her, and he wasn't going to start now. "I was thinking about her," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd think about how we're doing. Just the two of us. I think she'd be proud," Skylar said with the absolute certainty that only a person of faith or a person who had never learned doubt could manage. "You take really good care of me. You always make my lunches and help with my homework and read me stories, even when you're tired." Logan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You make it easy, little warrior. You're the best part of my whole life." She leaned into him, comfortable and trusting. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the hawk circle and listening to the distant sounds of the base behind them. "Do you miss your old job?" Skylar asked eventually. The question caught him off guard. They didn't talk about his past often. He'd told her he used to be in the Navy, that he'd done important work but had left to take care of her after her mother died. She knew the broad strokes, but not the details. Not the classified operations, the close calls, the nights when he'd wondered if he'd make it home. Not the years of training that had turned him into something more weapon than man. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "I miss the people I worked with. The sense of purpose, knowing that what we did mattered." "But you have purpose now," Skylar said, looking up at him. "Taking care of me. That matters." His throat constricted with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart. It does. More than anything else ever has." "Then why do people treat you like you don't matter?" The question was quiet, but it cut deep. "Like those men in the lunchroom. They were making fun of you." So she had heard. Logan silently cursed himself for not being more careful, for not shielding her better from the casual cruelty that existed in any social hierarchy. "People sometimes judge others based on their jobs or their status," he explained carefully. "They think if someone's doing work they consider simple or unimportant, then that person must not be very smart or capable. But that's stupid." Schuyler declared with the fierce certainty of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world didn't always reward logic or fairness. Logan smiled despite himself. Yeah, it kind of is. But here's the thing. Being important isn't about what other people think of you. It's about what you do with your time, who you help, how you treat people. I could have the fanciest job in the world. But if I wasn't there for you when you needed me, if I wasn't helping you grow up to be a good person, then none of that other stuff would matter. Schuyler considered this, her small face serious. So you chose me over being important to other people? I chose you over everything, Logan said simply. And I'd do it again 1,000 times. She hugged him then, fierce and tight, her small arms barely reaching around his chest. Logan closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of cafeteria food. This was what he'd traded his career for. These moments of pure connection with another human being who depended on him completely and loved him without reservation. The Navy had taken so much from him over the years. It had taken his 20s, his innocence, his certainty that the world was a place where good and evil were easily distinguished. It had taken friends whose names were carved on memorials and whose faces still appeared in his dreams. And ultimately, it had taken his wife, because she'd been alone when the aneurysm hit, when something deep in her brain had simply burst without warning. And he'd been 8,000 miles away on a mission he still couldn't talk about, but he wouldn't let it take Schuyler. He wouldn't let her grow up wondering where her father was, why his work was more important than her recitals and parent-teacher conferences, and all the small moments that actually made up a life. He'd given the Navy everything it had asked for and more, and when it came time to choose, he'd chosen her. Come on, he said, gently disentangling himself from her hug. You've got class in 10 minutes, and I've got a paint spill to clean up. Will I see you after school? Schuyler asked as they started walking back toward the main buildings. I'll be right outside the door, same as always, Logan promised. Maybe we'll stop for ice cream on the way home if you finish your reading assignment. Deal, she said. Skipping ahead again, her earlier sadness apparently forgotten or at least set aside, Logan followed at a steadier pace, his mind already shifting to the practical concerns of paint removal and supply inventory. But a part of him remained focused on his daughter, tracking her movement, monitoring her safety with the same intensity he'd once applied to protecting his team in hostile territory. Commander Natalie Briggs, walking the opposite direction on her way to an afternoon briefing, passed them on the path. Her eyes caught Logan's for just a moment, and something passed between them, not attraction, not recognition, but a kind of mutual awareness that suggested both of them were more than they appeared. Then the moment passed, and they continued in their separate directions, each carrying burdens the other couldn't see and secrets that might never be revealed. But fate had a way of forcing revelations, whether people were ready for them or not, and on a military base where everyone thought they knew everyone else's story, the truth was about to surface in the most unexpected way possible. The base auditorium filled quickly that Thursday afternoon, with rows of seats occupied by personnel from various departments. It was the quarterly readiness briefing, a mandatory event where senior leadership outlined operational priorities, safety updates, and recognition for outstanding performance. Logan normally avoided these gatherings, but Building 4, where the auditorium was located, needed a deep cleaning after a plumbing issue the previous week. And the work couldn't wait. He'd positioned himself in the back corner with his supplies, planning to work quietly while the briefing proceeded. Schuyler was at extended care, safe and supervised, giving him time to tackle the water-stained baseboards and carpet, cleaning without worrying about her getting bored or restless. The lights dimmed as the presentations began. Logan worked methodically, his cloth moving in steady circles over the damaged wood trim. The speakers droned on about deployment schedules and equipment upgrades, their words fading into background noise as he focused on his task. Commander, Natalie Briggs took the stage about 30 minutes into the briefing. Unlike the previous speakers who'd read from prepared notes, she commanded the podium with natural authority. Her voice clear and forceful as she outlined recent training initiatives and operational successes. Logan glanced up occasionally, noting how the audience sat straighter when she spoke. How even the senior officers gave her their full attention. She had earned her position through capability, not politics, and everyone in the room knew it. "Before I conclude," Natalie said, her gaze sweeping the auditorium, "I want to address something that's been brought to my attention regarding standards and accountability." The room tensed slightly. When commanders started talking about standards, it usually meant someone was about to receive criticism. "We pride ourselves on being the best," Natalie continued. "The most elite, the most capable, the most disciplined. But I've noticed something troubling in recent weeks. I've seen personnel walking past trash without picking it up, leaving equipment unsecured, treating our facilities with casual disregard." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And I've seen how some of you treat the people who maintain these facilities. The custodial staff, the maintenance workers, the contractors who keep this base functional while you focus on your tactical training." Logan's hands stilled on the baseboard. He had a bad feeling about where this was going. "These people are invisible to most of you," Natalie said, her tone sharpening. "You walk past them without acknowledgement. You leave messes for them to clean up. You treat them as if they're somehow beneath you because they don't wear our uniform." She turned, and her eyes found Logan in the back corner. The gesture was small but deliberate, drawing attention to his presence. "Take our custodian here," she said, gesturing toward him. "I've been on this base for 3 years, and I couldn't tell you his name until I looked it up this morning. Logan Martinez. He's been keeping our buildings clean for 5 years, and how many of you have ever thanked him? How many have treated him as anything other than part of the furniture?" Logan felt heat rising in his chest, a familiar sensation he'd learned to suppress, but never quite eliminate. This wasn't acknowledgement. It was something else. She was using him as an object lesson, a prop in her lecture about respect and standards. Several hundred faces turned toward him. Some looked guilty, others merely curious. A few junior officers smirked, clearly finding humor in the situation. "Stand up, Martinez," Natalie called out, her voice carrying across the auditorium. Logan set down his cleaning cloth slowly. Every instinct told him to refuse, to maintain his invisibility. But refusing a direct instruction from a commander in front of the entire base would cause exactly the kind of attention he'd spent 5 years avoiding. He stood, shoulders straight but expression neutral. "How long did you serve before taking this position?" Natalie asked. Natalie asked. The question landed like a grenade. Logan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She'd done her research, enough to know he had a military background, but clearly not enough to know the whole story. 12 years, he said quietly, his voice barely carrying past the first few rows. "Speak up," Natalie commanded. "Everyone should hear this." 12 years, Logan repeated, louder this time. "And why did you leave?" The auditorium had gone completely silent. This had shifted from a lecture about respect to something more personal, more invasive. Logan could feel the weight of judgment from the crowd, their assumptions forming in real time. Left after 12 years, now working as a janitor. Must have been a problem discharge, couldn't hack it. Washed out. "Personal reasons," Logan said, his voice flat. "Personal reasons," Natalie repeated. And there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't find that answer satisfactory. "So you served your country for 12 years, and now you're content to mop floors and take out trash?" The implications hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Content to do menial work. Content to be invisible. Content to be less than what you were. Logan's hands, hanging loose at his sides, curled into fists. Not from anger at her exactly, but from the frustration of being forced into visibility, of having his carefully constructed life of quiet purpose turned into a spectacle. "I'm content to be where my daughter needs me to be," he said. And his voice carried an edge now, a hardness that made several people in the front rows shift uncomfortably. Natalie's expression flickered, something passing across her face too quickly to identify. She'd pushed, and he'd pushed back, but now she was committed to her point. "That's admirable," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But it seems like a waste of training and experience. The Navy invests millions in developing skilled personnel, and when they leave to take low-skill civilian jobs, that investment is lost." "The Navy doesn't own people," Logan said quietly. "Service has an end date. What we do after that is our choice." "Of course," Natalie replied. "But some choices serve the greater good better than others." The implication stung because it was designed to. She was suggesting, in front of hundreds of personnel, that his choice to prioritize his daughter over continued military service was somehow selfish, somehow a betrayal of the investment the Navy had made in him. Logan felt something shift inside him, a wall that had held firm for 5 years developing a crack. He'd endured mockery, dismissal, and casual disrespect without reaction. But this was different. This wasn't ignorant junior officers making jokes. This was a senior commander publicly questioning his choices, his priorities, his worth. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" Logan asked, his voice level but carrying an undertone that made several veterans in the audience sit up straighter. Natalie hesitated, perhaps sensing she'd pushed further than intended. "Granted. The greater good is an abstract concept," Logan said. "My daughter isn't abstract. She's real, and she needed a parent who was present, not deployed 8 months out of the year. I made my choice, and I'd make it again. If that makes me a waste of training in your eyes, I can live with that judgment." The auditorium was utterly silent now. Several people looked uncomfortable, clearly feeling the tension rising between the commander and the janitor. This had stopped being a lecture and become a confrontation. Natalie's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by civilian staff in front of her personnel. "I'm not questioning your right to make that choice," she said, her voice cooler now. "I'm questioning whether it was the right choice. With respect." "Commander," Logan said, and his use of her rank was deliberate. A reminder that he understood military protocol, even if he no longer wore the uniform. "You don't have enough information to make that judgment." "Then perhaps you'd like to enlighten us," Natalie replied, crossing her arms. "What did you do during your 12 years of service? What was your rate? Your specialty?" The crack in Logan's wall widened. She was forcing his hand, pushing him toward a revelation he'd never wanted to make. He could refuse to answer, could cite privacy and walk away. But walking away now would cement every negative assumption the room had already made about him. He thought of Skylar, waiting for him at extended care, excited to show him the drawing she'd made in art class. He thought of their quiet life, their simple routines, the peace he'd fought so hard to build. And he thought of the men he'd served with, the ones who hadn't made it home, who would never have the chance to choose between glory and fatherhood because that choice had been taken from them. "I was a SEAL," Logan said quietly. "Special operations. I did the work that doesn't make it into official reports." The room erupted in whispers. Natalie's expression shifted from confrontational to shocked in the span of a heartbeat. She'd been trying to make a point about respect for support staff, and she'd accidentally cornered a former operator into revealing himself. "What was your call sign?" Someone called from the middle rows, their voice carrying a note of skepticism. Plenty of people claimed SEAL experience who'd never made it through training. Logan closed his eyes briefly. The question he'd hoped never to hear again. The name he'd left behind along with everything else. When he opened his eyes and spoke, his voice was steady, but it carried the weight of 100 missions and 1,000 difficult choices. Lone Eagle. The auditorium exploded. The name hit the room like a flashbang grenade, stunning everyone into momentary paralysis before chaos erupted. Officers turned to each other, voices rising in disbelief and excitement. Junior personnel pulled out phones, searching for information. Senior commanders sat frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to something approaching awe. Lone Eagle wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered in the teens, a name attached to operations that officially never happened. The operator who'd gone deep into hostile territory alone when his team was compromised, who'd held off enemy forces for 16 hours while calling in strikes and evacuation support. The man who'd turned what should have been a catastrophic loss into an impossible victory. He disappeared from active duty 5 years ago, and no one knew what had happened to him. Some said he'd died on a classified mission and the military covered it up. Others claimed he'd gone private sector, selling his skills to the highest bidder. A few suggested he'd simply burned out, the way even the best operators eventually did when the stress and trauma accumulated beyond bearing. No. One had imagined he was mopping floors on a San Diego naval base. Commander Natalie Briggs stood at the podium, her face pale. She'd wanted to make a point about respect and visibility, and instead she'd publicly humiliated a decorated special operator who'd chosen anonymity. The irony was brutal and immediate. She started, then stopped, clearly struggling to find words adequate to the situation. I didn't know. Logan remained standing in the back corner, his cleaning supplies at his feet, his expression carefully neutral despite the storm of attention now focused on him. He'd spent 5 years building a wall between his past and present, and she'd demolished it in less than 5 minutes. A senior chief in the front row stood abruptly, coming to attention. Others followed, a ripple effect spreading through the auditorium as personnel rose to their feet in respect. Within seconds, nearly everyone was standing except Logan himself, and a handful of people too shocked to process what was happening. At ease, Logan said quietly, but his voice carried the unmistakable authority of command. Sit down, please. The use of please made it a request rather than an order, but the tone ensured compliance. People sat, though the room remained electric with tension and barely contained excitement. Lieutenant Wade Chun, sitting in the third row, turned to his neighbor with wide eyes. Holy shit, he whispered. That's actually him. My instructor at advanced tactical training told stories about Lone Eagle. I thought they were exaggerations. They weren't, replied an older master chief sitting behind him. I was stationed at Dam Neck when he came through for specialized training. Watched him clear a kill house in 43 seconds. Perfect execution, no wasted movement. He made it look easy, but I've never seen anyone else come close to that time. Across the auditorium, similar conversations erupted as people who'd heard the stories tried to reconcile them with the quiet man in maintenance coveralls standing in the back corner. Admiral James Rutherford, the base commander who'd been sitting in the front row listening to the briefing, stood and turned to face Logan. He was in his late 50s, gray-haired and distinguished, with rows of ribbons that told their own story of a long and accomplished career. Mr. Martinez, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. On behalf of everyone here, I apologize. You should never have been put in this position. Logan shook his head slightly. Not necessary, sir. I chose to remain anonymous. That's on me. But we should have known, Rutherford continued. Your service record should have been flagged. Someone in personnel should have recognized your name and ensured you were treated with appropriate respect. Respect isn't about what you've done, Logan said, echoing words he'd spoken to Skylar. It's about who you are now. I'm a custodian who takes care of his daughter. That's all anyone needed to know. That's all anyone needed to know. Natalie finally found her voice, though it came out strained. I owe you an apology, Martinez. I was trying to make a point about how we treat support staff, and instead she paused, clearly struggling with the magnitude of her mistake. I disrespected exactly the kind of person I was trying to defend. Logan looked at her directly for the first time since the confrontation began. His eyes, which had seemed ordinary before, now carried visible weight, the accumulated burden of things seen and done that most people would never understand. "You didn't know," he said simply. "And honestly, Commander, you weren't wrong. People do treat custodial staff poorly. They do walk past us like we're invisible. Using me as an example was fair, even if you didn't know the specifics." But Natalie started. "But nothing," Logan interrupted gently. "I'm still a janitor. I still clean floors and empty trash and fix broken fixtures. My past doesn't change my present, and it shouldn't change how people treat me. If anything, this proves your point. People should respect others based on their character and contribution, not their history or credentials." The auditorium had gone quiet again. Everyone listening to this strange reversal where the wronged party was defending the person who'd wronged him. A voice called out from somewhere in the middle rows. "Sir, why? Why take a custodial job when you could have done anything? Contracting, consulting, training, security. You could have made serious money with your background." Logan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer but somehow more intense. "My wife died while I was deployed," he said, the words clearly difficult despite the years that had passed. "Sudden, unexpected. Brain aneurysm. She was gone before the ambulance arrived, and I was on the other side of the world, doing work I can't talk about. My daughter was 4 years old, and she spent 3 days with neighbors before I could get emergency leave to come home. You could have heard a pin drop. When I got back, Skylar wouldn't talk to me. She'd bonded with the neighbor's family because Mommy was gone and Daddy wasn't there. It took weeks before she'd even let me hold her again." His voice wavered slightly, the only crack in his composure. "The Navy offered me another assignment, a promotion, more responsibility. And I realized that if I took it, I'd lose her the same way I lost her mother, not to death, but to absence." He looked around the room, making eye contact with various people as he spoke. "So I resigned. Found the simplest job I could on a base where Skylar could go to school and have structure and stability. A job with set hours, no deployments, no danger. A job that lets me be there when she wakes up and when she goes to sleep. A job that leaves energy for helping with homework and making lunches and reading bedtime stories." His gaze returned to Natalie. "That's why, Commander. Not because I couldn't do other things, but because this is what my daughter needed. And after giving the Navy 12 years, I figured I'd earned the right to give the next 12 to her." Natalie's eyes were glassy, though she maintained her composure through sheer force of will. Several people in the audience weren't as successful, openly wiping at tears or turning away to compose themselves. Admiral Rutherford cleared his throat, his own voice rough with emotion. That's the most honorable thing I've heard in 30 years of service." Logan shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just being a father, sir. Millions of people do it every day. They just don't get attention for it because they never did anything noteworthy before." "But you did," said the Master Chief who'd spoken earlier. "You saved lives. You completed missions everyone said were impossible. You're a legend in the teams." "I was," Logan corrected gently. "Past tense. Now I'm just a dad who happens to have an interesting resume. And honestly, I prefer it that way." He bent down and picked up his cleaning cloth, the gesture deliberate. "If we're done here, I have baseboards to finish before I pick up my daughter from extended care. She's expecting ice cream tonight, and I don't like to disappoint her." The normalcy of the statement, delivered in a room full of people still processing the revelation, was almost surreal. Here was a man who'd operated at the highest levels of military capability, and he was worried about finishing his cleaning duties and buying his daughter ice cream. Admiral Rutherford nodded slowly. "Dismissed, Mr. Martinez. And thank you for your service, both past and present." Logan gave a slight nod and returned to his work, kneeling by the baseboard as if the last 15 minutes hadn't happened. The briefing was clearly over, but no one moved. They all sat watching the legend clean baseboards with the same meticulous care he'd probably applied to planning operations that saved lives and changed outcomes. Finally, slowly, people began to file out. But many paused as they passed Logan's corner, offering quiet words of thanks or respect. He acknowledged each with a nod, but didn't stop working. Determined to maintain normalcy, even as his world had just been turned inside out, Natalie remained on the stage, watching him. When the auditorium had mostly cleared, she walked to the back corner where he worked. "Martinez," she said quietly. He looked up, cloth still in hand. "I really am sorry," she said. "I had no right to put you on the spot like that." "You were doing your job," Logan replied. "Commanders are supposed to challenge their people, make them think. You just didn't know you were challenging someone who'd already made the hardest choice of his life." She studied him, this man who seemed so ordinary and yet carried so much weight with such quiet grace. "Can I buy you a coffee? After you finish here?" "I'd like to, I don't know, understand." Logan considered the offer. Every instinct told him to refuse, to maintain distance, to keep his two worlds separate. But something in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the command authority, made him pause. "I have to pick up Skylar at 1600, he said. "But there's a coffee shop on base. 20 minutes after I finish this section?" Natalie nodded. "I'll be there." The base coffee shop occupied a small building near the commissary. A civilian-run operation that served decent espresso and mediocre pastries to personnel, looking for something more interesting than break-room coffee. Logan arrived to find Natalie already seated at a corner table, 2 cups in front of her. "I didn't know what you liked," she said as he approached. "So I got black coffee and a latte. Take whichever you want." Logan took the black coffee, settling into the chair across from her. The shop was quiet at this hour, with only a handful of other customers scattered at distant tables. Privacy, at least relative privacy, in a place where privacy was increasingly rare for him. "Thank you for coming," Natalie said, wrapping her hands around her latte. "You didn't have to." "No," Logan agreed. "But you asked, and I figured you had questions." "1,000 of them," she admitted. "But mainly just how? How do you go from being Lone Eagle to being content with?" She gestured vaguely. "This?" Logan sipped his coffee, considering his answer. "You're asking the wrong question," he said finally. "It's not about being content with less. It's about understanding what actually matters, which is being present," Logan said simply. "Being there for the people who need you. The Navy taught me to be effective, to complete missions, to achieve objectives. But it never taught me to be fully present with another human being. That's something I had to learn after I left." Natalie frowned slightly. "But the work you did, it mattered. You saved lives. You changed outcomes. That has value beyond personal satisfaction." "It does," Logan agreed. "And I'm proud of that work. But here's what I learned, Commander. The world has plenty of capable operators. If I hadn't done those missions, someone else would have. Maybe not as effectively, maybe with more casualties, but the missions would have been completed. The work would have gotten done." He paused, staring into his coffee as if seeing something in its dark surface. "But there's only one person in the world who can be Skylar's father. Only one person she call Dad, who she remember raising her, who she think about when she's older and making her own choices. That position can't be filled by someone else. It's mine alone, and if I don't show up for it, it stays empty." Natalie absorbed this, her fingers tightening around her cup. "So you chose the irreplaceable role over the important one." "I chose the role where I was most needed," Logan corrected gently. "The Navy has thousands of trained operators. Skylar has one father. The math was pretty simple once I looked at it that way. But don't you miss it? Natalie pressed. The adrenaline, the sense of purpose, the brotherhood of the teams. Logan smiled, but there was sadness in it. Every day. There's a clarity to combat operations that civilian life doesn't have. Clear objectives, defined success criteria, immediate feedback on whether you're doing well or failing. Raising a daughter is nothing like that. You never know if you're succeeding until years later, and by then, it's too late to change course if you got it wrong. He took another sip of coffee. But missing something doesn't mean it was the right choice. I miss a lot of things about my old life. The certainty, the structure, the sense that I was doing something that mattered in an obvious way. But I don't regret leaving it. How can you not regret walking away from being a legend? Away from being a legend. Because legends are stories people tell about you when you're not in the room, Logan said. They're not real. The real me, the actual human being, was slowly being consumed by the work. Every mission took a piece of me. Every loss, every compromise, every impossible choice, they all added up. I was becoming less human and more weapon, and I could feel it happening. His expression darkened slightly. When my wife died and I wasn't there, that was the wake-up call. I'd spent a decade protecting strangers, and I'd failed to protect the person I loved most. Or maybe I hadn't failed, maybe it was just chance and timing. But the result was the same. She was gone, and I hadn't been there. Natalie set down her cup, her command mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion beneath. I lost someone too, she said quietly. A teammate. Training accident that shouldn't have happened. We were, she struggled with the words. We were going to get married after his next deployment. I'm sorry, Logan said, and meant it. It was 4 years ago, Natalie continued. And I threw myself into work. Pushed harder, trained longer, took every challenging assignment I could get. I told myself I was honoring his memory by being the best operator I could be. But really I was just running from the grief. That's understandable, Logan said. Work gives you control when everything else feels chaotic. It's easier to focus on objectives you can achieve than to sit with feelings you can't fix. Is that why you chose a simple job? Natalie asked. Because it gave you space to actually feel things instead of just accomplishing missions. Logan nodded slowly. Partly. Custodial work is repetitive, mindless in a lot of ways. That leaves mental space for being present with Skylar. For actually listening when she talks instead of planning the next tactical movement. It lets me be her father instead of just another person, managing her like an asset or objective. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. The teams teach you to optimize everything, to always be improving, always pursuing the next level of capability. That's valuable in combat, but it's terrible for relationships. You can't optimize love. You can't run drills to become a better father. You just have to show up, be present, be patient, and accept that you're going to make mistakes. That must be terrifying, Natalie said. After years of being the best at what you did, to choose something where you can't measure success. It is, Logan admitted. Every day I wonder if I'm doing it right. If Skylar's going to look back and resent the choices I made. If I'm preparing her for the world adequately or sheltering her too much. There's no training manual, no after-action reports to review and learn from. Just trial and error and hoping I'm getting more right than wrong. Natalie studied him, this man who'd commanded respect through capability and now commanded it through character. Do you think she understands what you gave up for her? She's 7, Logan said with a slight smile. She knows I used to be in the Navy, and now I'm not. That's about the extent of her understanding, and that's fine. She doesn't need to know about call signs and legends. She just needs to know her father loves her enough to put her first, always. But someday she'll understand, Natalie said. Someday she'll realize what Lone Eagle means, what you were, what you could have continued to be. Maybe, Logan said. And maybe she'd be proud, Or maybe she'll think I was foolish for walking away. Either way, I'll know I made the right choice, because I'll have been there for all the moments that mattered. Not just the big, obvious ones, but the small daily ones that actually shape a life. He finished his coffee and set the cup down with finality. That's the thing about legends, Commander. They're impressive from a distance, but they're lonely up close. I'd rather be ordinary and present than legendary and absent. I'd rather my daughter know her father is the man who made her breakfast and helped with homework than as a ghost who did important things in places he couldn't talk about. Natalie felt something shift in her chest. A fundamental assumption about purpose and value being challenged. She'd structured her entire adult life around achievement and capability, climbing ranks and proving herself. But sitting across from this former operator who'd chosen presence over prestige, she found herself questioning what she was actually working toward. I don't know if I could do what you did, she admitted. Walk away from everything I'd built. You could if you had a reason that mattered more, Logan said gently. Right now your career is your reason. That's valid. But if something or someone came along that needed you more than the Navy does, you'd find the strength to choose differently. He stood, checking his watch. I need to pick up Skylar. Thank you for the coffee, and for listening. Thank you for explaining, Natalie said, rising as well. And again, I'm sorry for what happened in the auditorium. I never meant to expose you. I know, Logan said. And honestly, maybe it's for the best. Living a double life was exhausting. At least now I don't have to hide who I was. I can just focus on who I am. They shook hands. A gesture of mutual respect between warriors who'd chosen different paths but understood the weight of the choices that led them there. As Logan walked toward the base school to collect his daughter, Natalie remained in the coffee shop, staring at the empty cups and thinking about presence versus achievement, about legends and loneliness, about whether the path she'd chosen was leading somewhere meaningful or just somewhere impressive. And for the first time in 4 years, she wondered if there might be more to life than running from grief through endless accomplishment. 3 days after the auditorium incident, Logan's life had settled into an uneasy new normal. People nodded respectfully when he passed, some even thanking him for his service. The mockery had stopped, replaced by a reverence that felt almost as uncomfortable as the previous dismissal. He'd traded invisibility for visibility, and he wasn't sure the exchange had been worth it. He was finishing his morning route through Building 3 when his radio crackled. Gary's voice came through, strained and urgent. Martinez, we've got a situation in the weapons storage facility. Chemical spill. Hazmat team is 20 minutes out. They need someone who can read tactical signage and help secure the area until the specialists arrive. You're the closest person with any kind of military background. Logan's stomach tightened. The weapons storage facility was a restricted area where he normally didn't have clearance. What kind of chemical? Some kind of propellant compound. The containment drum got damaged during inventory movement. It's not critical yet, but if it mixes with the wrong materials, we could have a serious problem. Logan was already moving, abandoning his cart in the hallway. I'm 3 minutes away. Tell security I'm coming. He ran, not the casual jog of someone responding to a minor issue, but the full sprint of an operator moving toward danger. 5 years of custodial work hadn't diminished his conditioning. He'd kept himself in shape because discipline was hard to abandon even when you no longer needed it for survival. The weapons facility was on the eastern edge of the base, a reinforced concrete structure surrounded by additional security fencing. 2 guards stood at the entrance, and one of them stepped forward as Logan approached. Martinez? You're cleared. The spill is in Section D, northwest corner. The supervisor is there now, but he's civilian contract. Doesn't know what half the warning labels mean. Logan nodded and moved past them into the facility. The interior was cool and dimly lit, rows of secured storage units stretching in organized lines. He followed the sound of raised voices and the acrid smell of chemicals to Section D. The scene was controlled chaos. A 50-gallon drum had tipped over, its contents spreading across the concrete floor. 3 civilian contractors stood at a safe distance, arguing about protocols. A Navy lieutenant stood nearby with a radio, coordinating the hazmat response. Logan assessed the situation in seconds. The spilled chemical was a rocket-propellant oxidizer, highly reactive but stable as long as it didn't contact certain metals or organic compounds. The problem was that the spill was spreading toward a drainage grate that would carry it directly into the facility's waste system, where it could contact all sorts of reactive materials. "We need to stop the spread," Logan said, his voice cutting through the argument. The lieutenant turned, irritated at the interruption, then recognized Logan. His expression shifted from annoyance to hope. "You know this stuff?" "Enough," Logan said. "Do you have sodium bicarbonate in your emergency supplies?" "Baking soda?" one of the contractors said. "For a chemical spill? It'll neutralize the oxidizer and prevent it from reacting if it hits the drainage system," Logan explained, already moving toward the emergency supply cabinet on the wall. "We need to create a barrier between the spill and that grate. Now." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty and command authority, galvanized everyone into action. The contractors stopped arguing and started following his instructions. Within minutes, they'd created a containment line using the sodium bicarbonate. Then began the careful process of absorbing the spill with specialized materials from the emergency kit. Logan worked alongside them, his movements efficient and precise. He'd trained for scenarios like this, had responded to chemical threats in field conditions where the margins for error were even smaller. This was actually relatively straightforward if you knew what you were doing. "Where'd you learn this?" the lieutenant asked, working beside him. "Naval Special Warfare training includes advanced hazmat response," Logan said. "Never know when you'll encounter chemical weapons or improvised explosives with volatile components." The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly. He'd heard the rumors about the janitor who used to be someone important. But hearing him talk with casual expertise about chemical weapons made it real in a way gossip never could. They worked for 15 minutes, carefully containing and neutralizing the spill. By the time the hazmat team arrived in their full protective gear, the immediate danger had passed. The team leader, a senior chief with 20 years of experience, surveyed the scene and gave Logan an approving nod. "Clean work," he said. "You saved us from having to evacuate half the base and shut down the waste system for decontamination. That's a week-long operation right there." Logan shrugged, already stepping back to let the specialists take over. "Just following basic protocols." "Basic for someone with your training maybe," the senior chief said. "For most people, they'd have panicked and made it worse." As Logan turned to leave, he found Commander Natalie Briggs standing near the entrance to Section D. She must have arrived with the hazmat team, her expression unreadable as she watched him. "A word, Martinez?" she said. They walked outside, away from the activity. The morning sun was bright after the dim interior of the facility, and Logan had to squint slightly as his eyes adjusted. "That was impressive," Natalie said. "The way you took control in there." "It needed to be done," Logan replied. "Someone had the training to handle it properly, so I did." "That's what I've been thinking about since our coffee," Natalie said. "You say you chose to be ordinary, to focus on being present for your daughter. But you're not ordinary, Logan. You can't turn that off. When there's a crisis, you step up. When there's a problem, you solve it. That's not ordinary." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Being capable doesn't mean I have to use that capability for everything. I can choose when to step up and when to step back." "Can you, though?" Natalie challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, you just risked exposure to toxic chemicals to help people you don't know. That's not the behavior of someone who's left his old life behind. That's the behavior of someone who's still an operator, just without the uniform. Her words hit closer than Logan wanted to admit. He'd told himself for 5 years that he'd left that life behind, that he was just a father now, just a janitor. But she was right. When danger appeared, he'd responded with the same instincts and training that had made him lone. Eagle, you could take the operator out of the teams. But apparently you couldn't take the teams out of the operator. What's your point, Commander? He asked, a edge creeping into his voice. My point is that you're lying to yourself, Natalie said bluntly. You think you've chosen a simple life, but you're still the same person you were. You just don't have an outlet for it anymore, except random crises like this morning. I have an outlet, Logan said firmly. My daughter. That's where I put my energy and focus. She's 7 years old, Natalie countered. What happens when she's older and doesn't need you constantly? What happens when she's in school all day and has her own friends and activities? Are you going to be satisfied mopping floors for the next 20 years? Logan felt anger rising, not at her questions, but at the doubts they awakened. He'd been so certain of his choice, had repeated his justifications to himself countless times. But Natalie was forcing him to confront something he'd been avoiding. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've been so focused on the present, on being there for Skylar right now, that I haven't thought much about what comes after. But that doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. It just means I chose to solve the immediate problem first. Natalie's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying you made the wrong choice. I'm saying that maybe you made a temporary choice, not a permanent one. Maybe there's a middle ground between being Lone Eagle and being invisible. Before Logan could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a message from the base school. Skylar fell on playground. Minor injury, but asking for you. Please come when available. All thoughts of chemical spills and philosophical debates evaporated instantly. I have to go, he said, already moving toward his truck. Is everything okay? Natalie called after him. My daughter needs me, Logan replied. And the words carried an absolute finality that made further conversation impossible. He drove to the school faster than regulations strictly allowed, his mind racing through possibilities. Minor injury could mean anything from a scraped knee to something more serious. The school wouldn't panic over nothing, but they also wouldn't downplay a real emergency. He found Skylar in the nurse's office, sitting on the examination table with an ice pack pressed to her right wrist. Her face was tear-streaked, but she wasn't crying anymore. When she saw him, her expression crumpled with relief. Daddy, she said. And he was across the room in 3 strides, gathering her carefully into his arms. I've got you, little warrior, he murmured. What happened? I fell off the monkey bars, she said, her voice small. My wrist hurts. The school nurse, a kind woman in her 50s, gave Logan a reassuring smile. I don't think it's broken, but I'd recommend having it x-rayed to be sure. She's got good range of motion and the swelling isn't severe, but better safe than sorry. Logan nodded, already planning. The base clinic was 10 minutes away. They could get an x-ray done within the hour. If it was broken, they'd need a cast and follow-up appointments. If it was just sprained, ice and rest for a few days, maybe a brace for support. Can we go home after? Skylar asked, looking up at him with those big dark eyes that could convince him of almost anything. After we get you checked out, absolutely, Logan promised. We'll get some ice cream on the way home too. Medicinal ice cream, doctor's orders. She giggled despite the pain. And Logan felt the familiar rush of gratitude that she was his, that he got to be the person she called for, that he'd made the choice 5 years ago, to be present for moments exactly like this. Natalie had questioned whether he was truly satisfied with his simple life, whether he was lying to himself about being content with ordinary fatherhood instead of extraordinary missions. But holding his daughter, feeling her relax against him in complete trust. He knew the truth. This was exactly where he needed to be. Not because it was simple or easy or impressive, but because it was real and it mattered in a way that no classified operation ever could. He carried Skylar out to his truck, the school nurse following with paperwork and care instructions. As he buckled her into her seat and drove toward the clinic, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, older than his 38 years. The face of someone who'd seen too much and carried too many burdens. But when Skylar reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently, he also saw something else. Peace. Real, genuine peace. The kind you only found when you knew you were exactly where you belonged. The X-ray showed a hairline fracture, minor but requiring a cast for 4 weeks. Skylar chose purple, declaring it was the color of royalty and therefore appropriate for a warrior princess recovering from battle injuries. Logan helped her pick out stickers to decorate it, and by the time they left the clinic, she'd transformed her injury into a badge of honor. "Can I show everyone at school tomorrow?" she asked as they drove home, admiring her newly decorated cast. "We'll see how you feel in the morning," Logan said. "The doctor said you might be sore for a few days." "I'll be brave," Skylar declared with the absolute confidence that only 7-year-olds possessed. They stopped for ice cream as promised, and Logan watched as Skylar attempted to eat her cone one-handed, occasionally needing help when the ice cream threatened to drip. These were the moments he'd chosen, the small, ordinary struggles and triumphs that made up a real life. His phone buzzed as they walked back to the truck. A text from an unknown number. "This is Natalie Briggs. Got your number from base directory. Hope Skylar is okay. When you have a moment, there's something I'd like to discuss. Not work-related." Logan stared at the message, uncertain how to interpret "not work-related." Their last conversation had been confrontational, challenging his choices and his self-perception. He wasn't sure he wanted to continue that particular discussion, but there was something in the phrasing, a vulnerability implied in "not work-related," that suggested this was personal rather than professional. He typed a brief response. "She be fine. Hairline fracture, 4 weeks in a cast. What did you want to discuss?" The reply came quickly. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. Can I buy you dinner? Somewhere off base, away from uniforms and ranks?" Logan helped Skylar into her car seat, considering the invitation. Every instinct told him to maintain distance, to keep his personal life separate from the complications that came with being recognized as Lone Eagle. But Natalie wasn't asking as a commander, or as someone seeking to use his expertise. She was asking as someone who'd challenged him and now seemed to regret it. He typed back, "Thursday evening, 1900. There's a Mexican place in Point Loma that Skylar likes. She comes with me." A pause then. "Perfect. See you then." "Perfect. See you then." The next day at work, Logan found that the chemical spill incident had spread through the base as quickly as his identity revelation had. People who'd seen him as just a janitor were now viewing him as someone who stepped up in a crisis, someone whose training and capability extended beyond mopping floors. A young sailor stopped him in the hallway that afternoon. Mr. Martinez, I just wanted to say thank you." Logan paused, his cart stopping with him. "For what?" "My brother works in that weapons facility," the sailor said. "He was one of the contractors there during the spill. He said you kept everyone calm and knew exactly what to do. If that chemical had reached the drainage system, the whole facility would have been evacuated and he'd have lost weeks of work during the decontamination." "I just did what needed doing," Logan said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "That's what leaders do," the sailor replied. "They see what needs doing and they do it, whether it's their job or not. You're still a leader, even if you don't wear the uniform anymore." The words stayed with Logan throughout the day. Still a leader. Still an operator. still the person who stepped forward when situations demanded it. Natalie had been right about that much. He couldn't simply turn off decades of training and instinct. But did that mean he was lying to himself about being content with a simple life? Thursday evening arrived with typical San Diego perfection. Clear skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of ocean and jasmine. Logan and Skylar arrived at the restaurant first, securing a booth near the window. Skylar entertained herself by coloring on the kids' menu with her left hand. Her purple cast resting carefully on the table. Natalie arrived exactly at 1900, punctual in the way military personnel always were. But she wasn't in uniform. Instead, she wore civilian clothes, jeans and a simple blue blouse that made her look younger and less imposing than her command presence usually projected. "Commander Briggs," Skylar exclaimed when she approached the table. "Just Natalie tonight," she said, sliding into the booth across from them. "How's the wrist, warrior?" Skylar held up her decorated cast proudly. "It's purple. And I got to miss school for the X-ray, which was pretty cool even though the wrist hurt." "That is very cool," Natalie agreed with appropriate seriousness. "Purple is definitely the right choice for a cast." They ordered. Skylar getting chicken tenders because that's what 7-year-olds ordered at Mexican restaurants regardless of how authentic the menu might be. As they waited for food, Natalie's earlier confidence seemed to waver slightly. "I've been thinking about what I said to you," she began. "After the chemical spill. About you lying to yourself." Logan waited, not making it easy for her. "I was wrong," Natalie continued. "Or not wrong exactly, but I was projecting my own struggles onto you. I've been questioning my choices lately, wondering if I've sacrificed too much for my career. And when I saw you, someone who'd achieved everything I'm striving for and then walked away, it challenged everything I believe about purpose and meaning. So you attacked my choices to defend your own," Logan said. "Not unkindly." "Yes," Natalie admitted. "And that was unfair. You don't owe me or anyone else justification for how you choose to live your life. If being present for Skylar is enough for you, if custodial work gives you the peace and stability you need, then that's valid. I shouldn't have suggested otherwise." Skylar looked between the two adults, sensing the weight of the conversation, even if she didn't fully understand it. "Daddy makes the best choices," she declared loyally. "He always knows what to do." Natalie smiled at her, genuine warmth in the expression. "I'm beginning to see that." The food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Skylar dominated much of the discussion, telling stories about school and her friends and the elaborate imaginary games she played at recess. Natalie listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at Skylar's animated descriptions. Logan watched the interaction, seeing a different side of the commander. Without the armor of rank and uniform, she was simply a woman who'd lost someone she loved and thrown herself into work as a coping mechanism. Someone who was maybe starting to question whether that strategy was sustainable long-term. After dinner, while Skylar was distracted by the restaurant's small arcade area, Natalie and Logan had a moment of relative privacy. "Can I ask you something personal?" Natalie said. Logan nodded. Double quotes. "Do you ever regret it? Not the choice to leave, but what you lost when you did. The purpose, the mission, the knowledge that you were doing something most people couldn't." Logan considered the question carefully. "I regret that I can't have both," he said finally. "I regret that the world required me to choose between being an exceptional operator and being a present father. But I don't regret which choice I made. The loss is real, but the gain is greater." "How do you measure that?" Natalie asked. "How do you quantify the value of being present versus the value of saving lives through your work?" "You can't," Logan said simply. "It's not a calculation. It's a priority. I decided that my daughter's well-being was my highest priority, and everything else had to align with that. The teams, the missions, the identity of being Lone Eagle. They all had to be sacrificed because they conflicted with that priority. He glanced toward Skylar, who was attempting to win tickets from a claw machine game with her one good hand. Will I look back in 20 years and wonder what I could have accomplished if I'd stayed? Probably, but I'll also know that I was there for every important moment in my daughter's life. I'll know that she never wondered if her father loved her more than his work, because the answer was always obvious. Natalie followed his gaze. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her, Logan corrected. She gave me a reason to leave when I needed one, but didn't know it yet. The teens were consuming me, turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Losing my wife was devastating, but it also showed me what really mattered. Skylar saved my life by needing me to save hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Skylar finally win a small stuffed animal from the claw machine and celebrate with a triumphant dance. I think I need to figure out what my priorities actually are, Natalie said quietly. I've been running toward achievement and away from grief for so long that I've forgotten to ask myself what I actually want from life. That's a hard question, Logan acknowledged. And there's no right answer except the one that's true for you. For me, being Skylar's father is enough. For you, maybe command and leadership is enough. Or maybe there's something else you're missing. Only you can figure that out. Natalie nodded slowly. Thank you. For dinner, for the conversation, for not telling me to mind my own business when I had no right to question your choices. You cared enough to question, Logan said. That's worth something. Most people either dismiss me as a failed veteran or put me on a pedestal as a living legend. You treated me like a person making real choices with real consequences. I appreciate that. Skylar returned with her prize, a small purple elephant that perfectly matched her cast. Look what I won. That's perfect, Natalie said warmly. What are you going to name it? Courage, Skylar declared. Because it takes courage to win prizes from claw machines with a broken wrist. Logan and Natalie both laughed. And for a moment, the weight of their respective burdens felt lighter. 2 weeks after the dinner, Logan received an unexpected visitor at work. He was cleaning the administrative conference room when Admiral Rutherford appeared in the doorway, his expression serious but not hostile. Martinez, do you have a moment? Logan set down his spray bottle. Of course, sir. Rutherford closed the door behind him, which immediately told Logan this was a private conversation, not an official one. The Admiral took a seat at the conference table, gesturing for Logan to do the same. I pulled your service record, Rutherford said without preamble. Required security approval and several signatures, but I wanted to understand who we have working on this base. Logan's stomach tightened. His record was heavily redacted. Most of his operational history classified at levels that even base commanders didn't normally access. Sir, I can explain. Rutherford held up a hand. I'm not here to question your past. I'm here to understand it. Because what I found raises questions about why someone with your clearances and capabilities is mopping floors. He opened a folder, though Logan suspected he'd already memorized the contents. 12 years of service, most of it in naval special warfare. Multiple combat deployments to locations that are still classified. Commendations for actions that can't be described in official records. And then, 5 years ago you resigned. Not retired, not discharged, but voluntary resignation with full honors. That's correct, sir. What I don't understand, Rutherford continued, is why. The official reason listed is personal family matters, but men like you don't walk away for vague personal reasons. There's always a story, a moment when the choice becomes clear. I'd like to hear that story, if you're willing to share it. Logan was quiet for a long moment, deciding how much to reveal. Finally he began to speak, his voice low and controlled. The last mission I ran was in 2019, he said. Classified operation to recover assets from a hostile territory. The intelligence was compromised, and we walked into an ambush. Lost 2 men in the initial contact, had 3 more wounded. We were pinned down for 16 hours while I coordinated extraction and air support. He stared at the conference table, seeing not the polished wood, but the rocky terrain where his team had bled. We got everyone out eventually, the wounded and the dead. Mission was technically successful. Assets recovered, remaining personnel evacuated. I was recommended for a medal I can't name for actions I can't describe, but Rutherford prompted gently. But while I was coordinating that extraction, calling in airstrikes and managing casualty evacuation, my wife was dying in a hospital 3 miles from our home. Brain aneurysm, no warning, nothing anyone could have done. She was conscious for about 20 minutes after it happened, long enough to ask for me, to want me there. And I wasn't. Logan's voice remained steady, but his hands had clenched into fists under the table. I got the notification 6 hours later, when we reached the extraction point and I finally had secure communications. By then she'd been dead for 4 hours. I missed her last conscious moments by 6 hours. 6 hours I spent saving people I'd trained with for months instead of being with the person I'd promised to love. Forever, Rutherford's expression softened with understanding and empathy. The Navy granted me emergency leave, Logan continued. I flew home, dealt with the funeral arrangements, tried to figure out what to do with a 4-year-old who'd just lost her mother. Skylar didn't understand death, not really. She kept asking when Mommy was coming home, when I was leaving again, whether I was going to disappear too. He took a breath, steadying himself. Command was understanding. They gave me extended leave, offered support services, told me to take all the time I needed. And then they asked when I'd be ready for the next assignment. Because there's always a next assignment, always another mission. Always someone who needs the particular skills of an operator like me. And you realized you couldn't do both, Rutherford said quietly. I realized I'd already made my choice years ago. I just hadn't admitted it to myself, Logan said. Every time I deployed, every time I chose the mission over family time, every time I missed a birthday or school event, or just a quiet evening at home, I was choosing the Navy over my family. And my wife accepted that because she understood the importance of the work. But Skylar was too young to understand. She just knew her father was gone more than he was present. Logan met Rutherford's eyes directly. When my wife died, I had a choice. I could continue being Lone Eagle, continue running missions, earning commendations, and maybe dying heroically in some classified operation. Or I could be the father my daughter needed, the present, available, consistent parent who would always choose her first. So you walked away from everything you'd built, Rutherford said. I walked toward the only thing that mattered, Logan corrected. The teams would replace me. They'd find another operator, train another asset, complete the missions without me. But Skylar couldn't replace her father. I was irreplaceable to her in a way I never was to the Navy. That made the choice obvious, even though it was still hard. Rutherford nodded slowly. I have 3 children, he said. All grown now, all successful in their own ways. But my oldest daughter, she barely speaks to me. I missed too many moments, was absent for too many important events. I told myself I was serving a greater purpose, protecting our nation, doing important work. And I was. But I also lost something I can never get back, the relationship with my daughter during her formative years. He looked at Logan with something approaching envy. You made the hard choice while you still had time to make it matter. That takes a kind of courage that's rarer than combat bravery. I don't know about courage, sir, Logan said. I was scared. Terrified, actually. I'd spent my entire adult life being Lone Eagle, being an operator, knowing my purpose and value through my work. Walking away from that meant facing an uncertain future as just a single father with no idea if I was capable of doing it well. But you did it anyway, Rutherford said. Because the alternative was losing my daughter the same way I lost my wife, not to death, but to absence. And I couldn't survive that loss twice. They sat in silence for a moment. Two military men contemplating the costs and benefits of service. The sacrifices made and those avoided. I want to offer you a position, Rutherford said finally. Advisory role, helping train our personnel in crisis response and leadership under pressure. Better pay, more respect, recognition for your expertise. Logan shook his head before the Admiral finished. Thank you, sir, but no. That role would require irregular hours, travel for training exercises, time away from Skylar. I can't do that. What if we structured it around your daughter's schedule? Rutherford pressed. Morning sessions while she's in school, nothing that would interfere with your time with her. Logan considered this more carefully. It was essentially what Natalie had suggested, a middle ground between being invisible and being Lone Eagle, using his expertise without sacrificing his priority. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Rutherford said. Take whatever time you need. The offer stands indefinitely. But Martinez, I hope you'll seriously consider it. Not because the Navy needs you, though we do, but because I think you need it too. You've chosen to be present for your daughter, and that's admirable. But presence doesn't require invisibility. You can be both a father and a leader, both ordinary and extraordinary. After Rutherford left, Logan sat alone in the conference room, his cleaning supplies forgotten. The Admiral's words echoed in his mind, challenging the narrative he'd built about his choice. He'd framed it as all or nothing, either fully present father or absent operator. But maybe there was a third option. Maybe he could find a way to use his capabilities without sacrificing his priority. That evening, he asked Skylar a question he'd never asked before. Little warrior, would it bother you if Daddy had a different job? Still here on base, still able to pick you up from school every day, but teaching people instead of cleaning buildings? Skylar looked up from her homework, considering the question with her characteristic seriousness. Would you be happier? The question caught Logan off guard. What makes you think I'm not happy now? You always look sad when you're working, Skylar said simply. Not when you're with me, but when you're pushing your cart around. Like you're thinking about something that makes you miss things. Logan pulled her into a hug, humbled by her perception. Sometimes I do miss my old work, he admitted. But I love being with you more than anything. You can do both, Skylar said, as if it were obvious. You're really smart, Daddy. You should teach people stuff. Just as long as you're still home for dinner and bedtime stories. Always, Logan promised. Those are non-negotiable. Skylar hugged him back. Then you should do it. Be a teacher. That's important too, right? Helping people learn things that keep them safe. Later that night, after Skylar was asleep, Logan sat on his small apartment balcony and looked out at the lights of the naval base. For 5 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd given up, by what he was no longer. Lone Eagle had died when he resigned, and in his place was just Logan Martinez, custodian and father. But maybe Rutherford and Natalie and even his 7-year-old daughter were right. Maybe he didn't have to choose between being extraordinary and being present. Maybe there was a way to honor both the man he'd been and the father he'd become. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Admiral Rutherford. I'd like to discuss that advisory position, with conditions that prioritize my daughter's schedule above all else. The response came quickly. Understood. Let's talk tomorrow. And Martinez, thank you for reconsidering. Logan set down his phone and closed his eyes, breathing in the salt air and listening to the distant sound of helicopters on night exercises. He wasn't going back to being Lone Eagle. That chapter was closed. But maybe he could be something new, something that honored all parts of himself rather than hiding them. A father first, always. But also a mentor, a teacher, a man whose hard-won experience could help others survive the dangers he'd faced. Not a legend. Just a person trying to live a meaningful life. Finding balance between who he'd been and who he wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 6 months later, the base auditorium filled once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Logan Martinez stood near the front, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Naval Special Warfare Training Division logo. Not a uniform, but not custodial coveralls either. Something in between, something new. Skylar sat in the front row, her cast long gone but her purple elephant clutched firmly in her hands. Beside her sat Commander Natalie Briggs, also in civilian clothes, her hand resting gently on Skylar's shoulder. Admiral Rutherford took the podium, his voice carrying across the assembled personnel. Today we recognize someone who has taught us that strength takes many forms. Logan Martinez served this nation with distinction as a naval special warfare operator. But his greatest service began when he chose to step away from that role to be present for his daughter. Logan felt Skylar's eyes on him, saw her proud smile, and felt the familiar warmth that came from knowing he'd made the right choice. For the past 6 months, Rutherford continued, Mr. Martinez has served as our senior advisor for crisis response and leadership training. He's taught our personnel not just tactical skills, but something more important: how to make difficult choices, how to prioritize what matters, and how to lead with character rather than just capability. The audience applauded, genuine and warm. Logan saw faces he'd mopped floors past. People who'd once ignored him, now looking at him with respect earned not just through his past, but through his present choices. But what makes Logan's contribution unique, Rutherford said, is that he's done this while never missing a single school pickup, never missing a parent-teacher conference, never compromising on being the father his daughter needs. He's shown us that you don't have to sacrifice family for service or service for family. You just have to be clear about your priorities and build your life around them. After the ceremony, Logan walked outside with Skylar's hand in his and Natalie at his side. The three of them had fallen into an easy rhythm over the past months. Dinners together, weekend trips to the beach. Quiet evenings where Skylar did homework while Logan and Natalie talked about everything and nothing. I'm proud of you, Daddy, Skylar said, swinging their joined hands. You help people and you're still home for dinner every night. That's the deal, Logan said, smiling down at her. Always home for dinner. Natalie caught his eye over Skylar's head, and something passed between them. Understanding and possibility, and the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but both were ready to explore. Ice cream? Natalie suggested. Always ice cream, Skylar declared. And they walked toward Logan's truck together. A family in the making, built not on perfection but on presence. Not on grand gestures, but on showing up day after day. Logan had been Lone Eagle once, a legend whispered in the teams. Now he was just Logan, father and teacher, mentor and friend. He'd traded glory for grace, achievement for presence, and found that the trade had given him something far more valuable than any medal or commendation ever could. A life fully lived. A daughter fully loved. A future full of quiet mornings and simple joys, and the knowledge that when his time came to look back, he'd have no regrets about the moments he'd chosen to be present for. The legend had rested. The man had awakened. And in that awakening, he'd found peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.